Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast. Learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 142, and I had the pleasure of talking to Dr. Jeannelle Perkins, a psychotherapist, licensed family therapist, and an educator with over 20 years of experience serving clinicians and mentoring future clinicians across America. She's a creator of Into Me See, a proven system method for improving workplace connection, productivity, and relationship satisfaction. And she's recently spoken at TEDx Charleston on impacting of racism on Black intimacy. A sought-after speaker and author featured in Essence, Newsweek, and Vice, Dr. Jeannelle blends professional expertise with lived experience to promote mental and emotional wellness as an ultimate generational wealth. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you for watching and listening. Hello and welcome to Dr. Jeannelle. How are you, Doctor?
I'm well, thank you.
I'm excited to get into this conversation, not only from a psychological space in your world and your teachings and your support that you offer out to the world, but also the world of psychology is pretty interesting and an integrative process in terms of what I do to support individuals. So I'm excited to get into this based on your past of being in the military world and understanding all of those behaviors and actions and moves and all of that life that comes with, in addition to supporting a very, very robust, I want to say, Black community in their own evolution and their growth in awareness of who they are and who they can truly be. So, are you ready?
I am. Let's make it happen.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so here's a big bold question as I begin this conversation to share with people who you actually are. What in all that you've been through from your past, be it the military world and a mom of one or two children, but also supporting and wearing the identity of a Black woman in a mental health space. What has it taught you to believe about yourself? And has that defined who you've become and who you're stepping into at this moment of time?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because when I got into the world of mental health and counseling for couples in particular, I come from this space of spiritual awareness. So my parents were both ministers and they ran our marriage excellence and finance ministries within our church. And being an only child in that family that had a huge community that was focused on our spiritual health and our physical health, what I realized is that we didn't focus a great deal on our mental health. So I decided to go back to school and figure out sort of what is it that makes this spiritual connection so great, but we're still missing some things in terms of how to make relationships work and how to connect. And what I found is it's really in understanding the anxiety that exists within a relationship, sometimes the depression that exists for one person or another. And so it made me stop and take a step back and look at my own life and my own experiences and think about how those experiences were impacting all the relationships around me, whether it was in my marriage at the time, with my children, with my parents, with people in the church that I was connected to, particularly as an adult and running, being the director of a particular segment of ministry as well. And so having that level of self-awareness and connection really made my environment change and shift, where I knew that I now had a greater impact and ability to control some of the challenges that I was experiencing when I was able to be more emotionally regulated
Mhm.
and have greater relational intelligence, um, less anxiety, understand how my history was impacting this moment.
Right.
And it was transformative for me. Um, Now in my 50s, it's even greater because one, there are just certain things that I don't really care about.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah.
whatever, we'll move through that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think also because I realize that I don't have to let the past control me,
Hmm.
that I make and create my present day and my future. And mental health for me has been that catalyst for recognizing how much power I have as a Black woman.
Hmm. What was your journey through that? Was it a self-discovery through therapy,
Hmm.
through your peers? Um, Therapy still, I believe, has a stigma, a connotation around it that
Hmm.
you can't seek, don't be sharing your story and your experiences with somebody else, and definitely
Hmm.
don't be paying somebody else for that ear. That's what friends are for. That's what family and that's what community and in your space, perhaps that's what faith is for
Hmm.
from a religious standpoint.
Yeah,
So how
it's
did
the
you overcome that piece?
yeah, it's the idea that what goes on in this house stays in this house, right?
Yep.
So in the Black community, you hear that quite often. For me, I initially really had to separate from a number of the ideas that had been instilled from childhood.
Hmm.
Um, and that was very difficult because that meant that I was going against some of the spiritual, religious components of
Hmm.
what it meant to be a woman biblically, right?
Right.
And that I will have to say that was the most difficult piece. So I did seek some therapy around that. And my therapist at the time asked me one question. She said, if you don't do what they say, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
And I said, well, it's already happening. And that is oftentimes there was this um, being ostracized. And I'll never forget one time my mother actually said to me, who was a wonderful woman. She's not no
Mm.
longer with me. But I mean, just an absolutely phenomenal mom. And at the same time had her own religious beliefs that she was steeped in. And she said to me, you can no longer sit with us on the front row if you,
Mhm.
right? And that was a hard blow.
Mhm.
And yet I had to decide, was it more important to sit on the front row, or was it more important for me to become this person who truly was authentic to what I wanted in life? In the past, I sat on the front row.
Mhm.
As I got older, at this time I was probably in my late 30s, I decided it was more important that I be authentic to what I wanted, which was the freedom to be able to say I cannot be held responsible for my then husband's actions because biblically I'm supposed to be able to pray him through it and through
Mhm.
my own actions show
Mhm.
him how to move forward. I don't have control over him.
Mhm.
And yet I was feeling like the church was telling me that I had to have that kind of control through faith, through prayer and supplication.
Mhm.
And it wasn't working. It wasn't working.
Mhm.
So that was really, really difficult to not remove myself from my spirituality, my love for God, my connection and relationship with God, but the religiosity of what the people around me said
Right.
was truly being a godly woman.
Hmm. How did that change the relationship between you and your mother and your family and all these people who raised you?
Yeah, initially it was very difficult. I think as years went on, we came to a place where we understood that I was going to do what I was going to do. And that didn't mean that I didn't love her or the God that she showed me,
Mhm.
and that she didn't love me less, right? I had to recognize that our love and our relationship was just going to look different. Now, later in life, when she became ill, I don't think it mattered to either of us.
Right.
It mattered
Ultimately.
more
Yeah.
that it mattered more that I could take care of her.
Yeah.
There were conversations we would have where I would just go, okay, and
Mhm.
agree that I'm hearing and I understand. Not that I agree and accept that that's a truth, but I hear you and I understand what you're saying. And in this moment, I'm going to care for you
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah.
Um, at the end of the day, she's still my mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What were some of the mechanisms and tools that you utilized for yourself as you made that really big, difficult, and bold decision of, I've got to do this for me?
Mhm. I literally changed churches.
Mm.
I decided that I could no longer be in that space that was oppressing me.
Right.
And that I was going to go to a different church and get some new understanding. And it wasn't that it wasn't a different Bible,
Right.
it's the same Bible.
Yeah.
It just didn't come with the same pressure that it came with in the other space. And it wasn't that I was looking to sin in some deep way. It was that I
Hmm.
was looking for freedom of voice and
Hmm.
authenticity. I'll give you a prime example. We talk about the Proverbs 31 woman in the Bible. And, she's this woman who considered a field and was able to, make the purchase of that great land. And she took care of her home and her household, and she was able to go out and make purchase of goods from others, and she also sewed them. So she was a seamstress. That woman did all of that so that her husband could be able to go and sit at the gates and be amongst the elders and have these great conversations while she was at home toiling like crazy, right? And when I stop and think about that, that meant that she had to be a merchant, she had to be a tailor or seamstress. She had to be the caregiver. She had to be the cook. She had to be a real estate agent and broker. She,
Hmm.
she had to be a lawyer. There's no way in the world to do all that successfully
Hmm.
and not be stressed beyond belief.
Hmm.
So the new space that I went to, yes, believed in the Proverbs 31 woman, and yet recognized that there were aspects of that that apply to different women.
Yeah.
So where I may not be the real estate broker, I might be the seamstress.
Right.
Well, why can't I just be great in that? So I had to
Right.
change churches, which meant I then had to draw some boundaries for even my family, my children, um, that said that they did not have to go with their grandparents to the church that they
Hmm.
had always gone to,
Hmm.
that they now had the right and the ability to make a choice. Now, did we still go to church on Sunday or what have you? Yes, but it was different. So, boundaries, a literal shift and change in atmosphere and environment.
Hmm.
And then the last one, I think, was really being able to be quiet and not necessarily say everything I thought I needed to say.
Hmm. Hmm.
Sometimes it was okay just to accept the perspective of others
Yeah.
and still hold on to my own beliefs without having to verbally struggle to articulate it.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
And that's a tough spot to get to.
Hmm. Hmm. Because you're not sure whether or not you're still going to have the support system around you.
Hmm.
And I mean, loneliness is an epidemic even before the pandemic. The Surgeon General was talking about, the US Surgeon General was talking about loneliness as an epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic just,
Yeah,
exacerbated the
that's right.
situation.
That's right.
So imagine if you're trying desperately to make your own way and it's going against what you've been taught all your life and the people you know and love and believe to
Mm-hmm.
be your support system. You now are putting yourself in a position of loneliness,
Mm-hmm.
of being alone.
Right.
So now you have to decide how you're going to rebuild community.
Yeah.
And what does that look like?
And perhaps the bigger question is what is it you need? And what is it you want?
Hmm. That's probably the biggest question, because once you stop and become truly self-aware of your needs,
Mm-hmm.
then your wants, which people kind of are dismissive about, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
What you truly want is what you're going to go for because it stems from those needs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's powerful.
Yeah. It is. And when you get to embody it, it's a whole different ballgame of
Mm-hmm.
integrating it in all parts of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what do you believe is your calling at this moment of time?
Yeah, it's interesting because I thought up until probably about 4 months ago that my calling was specifically and strictly for the purpose of bringing an understanding of mental health and relationships to the Black community. And I'm still on that path, but I realize that the bigger purpose and calling is that I'm actually bringing a greater understanding of how our culture and the ways in which we interact with the rest of the world
Mm-hmm.
is not really accepted or deemed valuable by a number of clinicians
Mm-hmm.
that are interacting with us and engaging with us.
Mm-hmm.
So, my new purpose and calling that I realize is to help other clinicians understand how to treat us from a therapeutic space,
Right.
so that it's race-based medicine. It literally is connecting and being immersed in our culture enough that you can then treat us in a way that helps us see you as seeing us. So we
Mm-hmm.
feel heard and seen, and we can build the true therapeutic alliance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Prime example. We've all heard, well, many of us have heard the story about the African American woman who went to the hospital and she'd been there a couple of days. And a nurse comes in every few hours or what have you. And the woman is consistently patting her head. I mean, just patting the top of her head. And so finally, the nurse, who happens to be white, decides to do a psych consult because she said for 2 days, this woman has been beating herself in the head and I can't get her to stop. So a Black nurse comes on duty. They do their exchange to explain, what has occurred over the course of the day. And she says to her, I called in a psych consult for this particular patient because she keeps hitting herself in the head. And she said, well, what do you mean? So as they go in to converse and do, the changeover, the Black nurse comes out with the other nurse and says, no, her scalp itches. She is literally trying to scratch her scalp, but she doesn't want to mess up her hair. Now, that seems like it's not that big a deal. But if she had actually gotten a diagnosis of either, a personality disorder or that she was self-harming or anything of that nature, it could have changed the trajectory
Mm-hmm.
of what that patient is experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that happen all the time
Mm-hmm.
in the therapy world. where because you have a child or a person who isn't looking directly in your eyes when you speak to them, you now deem them to be less confident,
Mhm.
insecure, or what have you, when in all actuality, for many years, they've been taught not to look an adult in the eye in
Right,
that way.
right, right. Is that scenario that you've shared, that experience, is that then the lack of, be it confidence and awareness that that woman couldn't share her experience and share her reasoning as to what she was doing?
The patient who was patting her head,
Uh-huh.
she wasn't asked, why are you doing that?
Right, right. But then that also perhaps leads into a bigger question of, be it the healthcare industry or the world at large, is being open and receptive enough to asking questions, not as to why are you doing that particular act, but asking those bigger probing questions of what else is
Mm,
going on in life. I mean, perhaps
mhm,
leading into this conversation of a general medical doctor visit.
mhm, mhm,
Somebody goes in with a physical ailment, a sore knee, hypothetically.
mhm,
The doctor's going to treat just the symptom of the knee rather than expand it out of saying, what else is happening in your life?
mhm.
So are we leaning into that? And I don't want to mitigate or sugarcoat anything race or cultural related, because
Mhm,
I have my own perspective in terms of that, being as an Indian woman too, but
mhm,
also leaning into the space of, is it more empathy, more compassion, and more curiosity that every single
mhm.
industry needs in order to make us all be in a synergetic alignment as human beings?
Yeah. One of the courses that I teach is cultural humility before cultural competence.
Hmm.
And when we live in a space of cultural humility, we literally walk through our lives expecting to learn,
Right,
expecting to be more aware of what's happening in other people's spaces,
right.
being immersive in those spaces so that we're not making judgments about it as much as we are just coming to experience
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
space. When we do that, we set aside what we consider cultural competence, which is the book knowledge that says this is exactly what the assumptions are based on the evidence from white patriarchal
Hmm.
individuals in whatever industry have decided that that's what competence should look like.
Right.
Then what we get the opportunity to do is to set aside cultural conditioning that
Hmm.
says things like, Black people are able to withstand more pain than any other culture. So rather than give them some, a medication that would immediately ease their pain, we'll give them Tylenol. And we have research that demonstrates that that happens, that it is believed that that is the case. So if we move ourselves from the idea of only leaning on cultural competence and instead start from a place of cultural humility, we then live in a lifelong learning environment
Hmm.
where we now become more aware of what is happening in each other's space that creates the dynamic that we're experiencing at this moment.
What shifted? What shifted along the way? Because I imagine, from what I understand, and I'm talking centuries, decades, and what felt like a millennia back then, that was the norm.
Mm-hmm.
It was the norm to have appreciation, compassion, and understanding for other people's culture But other households, be it you look the same, you behave the same, or you speak the same language, but to having that curiosity to say, who are you, what are you, and what can we exchange, if you will, be it a dialogue, a
Mm,
principle, or a tool, what happened along the way for us to leave that beingness into a complete separation, and now we're driving back towards that.
mm. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that there was a time where we had greater empathy and
Hmm.
humility around culture,
Hmm.
and that we have now, in this day and age, moved toward more divisiveness.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know that we have moved more towards more divisiveness as much as it is that it has been become more acceptable to express it. So in times past, people felt like it was embarrassing to admit or to express that they did not understand another culture, or that they didn't like another culture, or that they believed whatever entity, media entity, said that particular culture was or how it existed.
Hmm.
So there was this code, or dog whistles is I guess what they call it, where there would be terms used in an effort to make light of the fact that you really were drawing a clear distinction between two cultures. And now we've come to a place where that no longer matters.
Hmm.
People just say what they want to as it pertains to race and racial division and cultural division. And whether it hurts or doesn't, they could really care less.
Hmm.
That was hidden before. Not many people, unless they were just blatant,
Hmm.
would come out and say that they believed something that was derogatory about another. I mean, and if you think about it, that's how we got to, in America, some of the systemic ways in which racism exists across BIPOC communities, Black,
Hmm.
Indigenous people of color,
Hmm.
is that there were just these fine lines drawn that you could not really see full fractures until you got to the end of a period and realized it created education gaps and wealth gaps and um, even healthcare gaps
Hmm.
that were so massive that it's become very difficult to bring it back. And so I see my job as being one of creating a safe space for these conversations, but that doesn't mean that it's comfortable.
Right.
So you can be safe, but you may be uncomfortable with the conversation around
Yep.
why clinicians are having such difficulty treating African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, etc., and even Asian Americans in this mental health space and relationship space um, that they don't necessarily think they're having difficulty in.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's an interesting world that we live in and how people want to be addressed,
Mhm.
yet perhaps the opportunity here is the internal narrative that one needs to have, from my opinion, regardless of what race, culture, and opportunity or
Mhm.
not you come from.
Mhm.
I think it's a space for us to do more introspective work. That thing that happened a couple of years ago that shut down the entire world was a great
Mhm.
opportunity and perhaps a catalyst for us to do that. However,
Mhm.
the impact and the implication of that will only be telling as time unfolds.
Yeah.
So, with all that you've said in terms of your role and your new calling and purpose that you've defined in supporting a culture and environment, both spectrums of it.
Mhm.
What do you believe are some of the attributes that allow you to do that on both parties?
Mhm. Well, I think that I come from a space where um, I'm not angry or bitter about it. So there's a softness to even my tonality around it.
Mm-hmm.
Though I'm firm and I am clear in expressing what the research says, I have a depth of understanding from my own lived experience, as well as clinical experience from my practice. I also have the ability to present things in a way that's humble and yet gentle, and yet um, also calls it out when it's wrong. And I think that people gravitate toward that because I'm respectful of their position and perspective
Mm-hmm.
and can say, I don't agree and I
Right.
think you're wrong. And at the same time, I have no difficulty going to lunch with you and discussing this in a different way to see
Sure.
where we might collaborate.
Sure.
And I think that makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
I've been called many a name by fellow clinicians who just don't agree with my perspective. And I'm always okay with the fact that that's the way you see it. And at the same time, if we're in an environment where others could be harmed by what's being stated, I'm going to call it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The advocacy role that we all choose to take
Mhm.
is pretty pivotal in not only the stance that we take, but perhaps a deeper calling in what we want the world to
Mhm.
look like.
Mhm. For sure. Um, and I think that means that we have to get beyond ourselves and really think about what is to come. And that can be very challenging because, I mean, in America, we're very individualistic. That's the world we live in. But I've lived all over the world, and particularly, and living in Asia and Japan, I was there for almost 8 years, and it's a collectivistic society. And when I consider how different that is in the ways that we, in the helping industries, think that we're servicing others, but doing so out of our own um, belief systems rather than out of trying to find the commonalities of another's belief system. What is it that you believe? What is it that you want for yourself? How do you desire to get there? Versus, let me tell you what you ought to, should be, could be doing,
Mhm.
because that comes from what I believe.
Right. Yeah. But that's also indicative of our environment in which we've been raised, as well as
Mhm.
the external narrative that runs very loudly out there.
Yeah.
So it's a twofold.
hmm It's the scripts that we've written on our own hearts, right? The internal relationship type of script, regardless of who you're engaging with and interacting with. And then, of course, social media puts out so much that is erroneous information about
Mhm.
how to connect. It's generally not rooted or founded in research in any way. And as a result, many people, particularly young people, are walking around completely misinformed about just making basic connections.
Mhm.
Plus, you can sit behind a computer and you can tickety tack away and write and say things that you would never say to anyone in person.
That's right.
And it's very unfortunate because a lot of damage is done in that space. I can't tell you the number of people who come through my office and are struggling because of something they read or saw or someone said on their Instagram, TikTok, Facebook page. And they don't really know these people,
Mm-hmm.
but it impacts them so much that they think of them in a particular way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the power of self-awareness, right? Do I really want to have other people's words, whether they know me or not, influence in who I am and how I breathe and move through the world? That's a
Mhm.
choice I get to make.
And the only space you get to control really is you. It's the
That's right.
smaller. I tell
Ultimately.
people all the time, you're the center of that bullseye. You control that.
Mm-hmm.
The next you might influence on the next rung of that bullseye. So what are the spaces you have influence in? And that influence you to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the outer rung is no control and no influence.
Yeah,
Where do you want to spend the bulk of your energy?
that's right. That's right. Ultimately, I guess my point is we're the ones in control.
Mhm,
We're the
mhm,
ones in control. What is your intentions with the craft that you have harnessed and garnered over the years and aligning with your calling and your mission and your purpose, newfound, if that?
mm,
What is the intentions you have for the future for that? So what's next
mm.
coupled with it?
Yeah, I really am hoping that I get this opportunity to help people form healthy, authentic relationships. Um, I write about those types of things all the time in articles and in my books and so forth. Just building that cognitive, emotional, spiritual intimacy with one another
Mm-hmm.
that gives you the opportunity to truly look beyond the outer physicality
Mm-hmm.
and see the spirit of a person, get to know the depths and understanding of who they are, who they were as children, what changes they've made in their lives, how their history has impacted today,
Yeah.
the emotions they really feel beyond good and bad, because that's what food tastes, good and bad, but the
Right.
emotions they feel and to know them, to into me see, such that you get to know
Mm-hmm.
who I truly am.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to leave that kind of legacy that when I went to Dr. Jeannelle or when I saw her on a television show or I read one of her books, I was able to not only show up authentically, but I was able to allow others to do the same and build connections based on who they are and not who I want them to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. It's a big mission, a big goal.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm sure you'll make great strides in that going forward. So
Thank
thank you
you.
for that. I am grateful for you to share your experiences, your journey, and your big mission that you have for the world.
Mm.
So I'm grateful
Thank
for you
you.
sharing and thank you for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.